Greetings, you curiouser and curiouser Herle Burly-ites. We've got a special two-part episode lined up for you today. A Canada-Alberta pipeline MOU double pod, double panel extravaganza. Unwieldy name, I know, but it's apt because we're going to look at the thing through the lens of both policy and politics with two different panels for a wide-ranging discussion and a diversity of strategic perspectives. First up, our MOU policy panel. Rick Smith, president of the Canadian Climate Institute and central to numerous policy advances provincially and federally over his 25-year career. Mark Podlasly, chief executive officer of First Nations Major Projects Coalition, and Heather Exner-Pirot, senior fellow and director of energy, natural resources, and environment at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute in Ottawa. Then our MOU political panel. Mike Macdonald, Air Quotes Media alumnus, co-host of the Hotel Pacifico pod, and partner, chief strategy officer at Kirk & Company. Cheryl Oates, principal and advisor at GT & Company and a co-host of the Discourse podcast. And Andre Pratt, strategist at Catalyze 4, former nonpartisan member of the Senate, and chief editorial writer at La Presse from 2001 to 2015. All right, let's get to it. All right, Herle Burly-ites, we're here now to talk about the policy aspects of this memorandum of understanding between the government of Alberta and the government of Canada. People have all sorts of different opinions about whether they like it or don't like it, but I think everybody agrees it's a pretty significant event. And so we've taken the time to gather these three experts, Rick Smith, Mark Podlasly, and Heather Exner-Pirot, to talk to us about the content of the MOU, what it accomplishes, what it doesn't, what it does economically, what it does climate-wise, what it does in Indigenous relations, etc. A lot of aspects to this. Thank you all for joining me, by the way. Great to see you.
Yeah, great to be
Good
here.
to be here.
Yeah,
great to see you.
I think it's late enough in December that I can say best of the season. Too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I'm deep into my stocking stuffer shopping. So
there we go.
You definitely can.
Absolutely. So I would like I've got a bunch of questions for you, but to start, I'd like each of you to just give me a few minutes. Don't rag the puck, but give me a few minutes on your overall take on this thing and what you like and don't like about it, what it accomplishes or doesn't accomplish. Mark, maybe I can start with you.
Well, from the broad perspective, it's needed. We need an agreement between Alberta and the federal government for energy exports. That's not in dispute. The challenge, though, and I'm coming from a First Nation perspective, is that the BC First Nations and the coast were not included in the discussion. That's going to be a problem. That's where I'm coming at this from.
Okay. All right. Heather?
Yeah, I loved it. If you had told me, 10 months ago that Alberta would be having this deal with a federal Liberal Prime Minister, I would never have believed it. We've seen kind of money, fly away, opportunities fly away. And I think there's a lot of substantial and even specific policy in here that helps address it. We've already seen the first, fruit of this, of Capital Power making an AI data center deal. So I'm very enthused about it and grateful that we have two leaders who, frankly, have taken a bit of heat from their base, but have made what I think is good policy that will be better for the country.
Okay, thank you, Heather. And Rick?
Well, I mean, with one exception, we're concerned about this MOU. We're concerned about the unintended consequences. It feels to us at a time when Canadian climate policy and investment needed more certainty. This MOU injects more uncertainty. It creates a variety of special carve-out deals for the province of Alberta. So that feels to us like the same moment we were at just over a year ago when the federal Liberals said, "Oh, we can do this special carve-out deal for the Atlantic provinces on this little specific thing related to consumer carbon pricing." And then, of course, the whole thing starts to unravel because if you do one carve-out deal for one province, surprise, surprise, all the other provinces line up for their own deals. So we're concerned about this starting a process of unraveling of climate policy across the country.
And what was the thing in it that made you think it was unraveling climate policy?
My biggest concern is around, well, a few things, but I'll start with how it treats clean electricity. So we've been very supportive of an effective, even-handed approach to clean electricity across the country. I mean, the Prime Minister talks a lot about the need to move towards one Canadian economy, one Canadian regulatory approach. We agree. We had that with this clean electricity regulation across the country, and now all of a sudden Alberta's been given some sort of yet to be defined special deal. And within hours of the MOU announcement, Doug Ford's lining up saying, well, me too, please. Ontario would like a special deal as well.
Okay. So Heather, as the most optimistic one of the group about the MOU, maybe I'll start with you on my next query, which is, this is something that seems to be a matter of some debate in the country. How likely do you think the pipeline is to be built?
Well, yeah, and the MOU and the discussion on it has focused on that pipeline, and I guess that's the nature of our politics. For me, the clean electricity regs carve out and the emissions cap are more important, and certainly in the short term, those are the ones that are going to elicit investment. But on the pipeline, this was, there was no path forward with the tanker ban, with the emissions cap. No one was ever going to come forward. And I think this MOU lays out a path that the federal government is saying there's a way to thread this needle. There's a way where you could have a set of circumstances where you could get this through, or we would support it. And we know already from Trans Mountain that if the federal government supports a pipeline to the Pacific Tidewater, there's a very good chance it'll happen. So, the economic, we can talk about the economics, but I think the economics are there. I think the demand is there. This MOU will give some confidence, I think, to Alberta as they move forward, that there's a way to get this pipeline through one day.
Mark, I'm interested in your take on this.
So this is interesting, is that I want to state up front is that I'm representing the First Nations Major Projects Coalition. I'm a member of a First Nation in British Columbia, not along the pipe route. We're along the Southern Pipeline route. But the challenge on this MOU is that it did not consult the nations in British Columbia, the ones who will host the pipe through British Columbia, and then the coastal nations on the tanker. I want to say what I said at the beginning. We need nation building projects. The country is in an economic position where we need to build new things rapidly. The question is how they're done and how Indigenous people are included in them. So you've heard a lot of press right now about what's going on for First Nations on the coast and some from the interior. But not all First Nations have stepped in to oppose this project. And I think what's happening in the media right now is you get this presentation that, all the Indigenous people are against this or against that. And that's not true. It's a complicated situation. The coalition I represent has 184 First Nations in it out of 620. That's almost 1/3 of the nations who want major projects as long as they're done in the right manner. And the question right now is this one going to be done in the right manner? Right now, the focus is on the tanker ban and the BC First Nations. Alberta First Nations, they're interested, and they have as much diversity as we have in people who want them and don't want them. So the question about this MOU being successful going forward will be how it's rolled out, not whether it should be done.
Yeah, go ahead, Heather.
Yeah, I just want to jump in, and I totally agree with everything Mark said. The MOU does talk about having to consult with BC First Nations specifically, and it has several provisions for ensuring that Indigenous communities are involved in the project and as equity owners and all those things. So, and as Mark fully knows well, there isn't enough of a project yet to consult, to do a duty to consult. It's still in earlier stages. We know that some Alberta ministers have engaged, very early kind of conversations. So it is very true that this is raised the hackles a lot of First Nations that this has gone forward without talking to them. But on the other hand, it's also very true that there is no impact on rights yet, and so you can talk about how the process worked out, but there is no way this pipeline is going to be built without a fulsome duty to consult of all those BC First Nations. And as Mark says, you're hopeful that you can find a way to thread that needle and get a critical mass that support it.
I would actually put that a bit forward. It's not the duty to consult anymore, it's consent. So that's going to be the challenge. And what does consent mean? And for some First Nations, consent means an equity stake. Others people, it's no. It's just depends.
Yeah.
Heather's right in the sense that this is an MOU towards setting the table for a discussion, for an agenda to possibly discuss, a pipe. It's not, there's no project, there's no proponent. First Nations have nothing to grab onto, nor does an investor at this point.
Yeah. Right. In some, though I suspect that your expectation, David, was that Heather and I would disagree most of the time. I
was just wondering whether you're more upset about the clean energy stuff than
I was going to say, so in one way, I actually agree with something she said a couple of minutes ago, which is even though, I don't know, let's put a number on it, like 95% of the media out of this MOU focused on this notional pipeline. where our approach to this is, I don't know if this pipeline's ever going to get built. I do find it puzzling that given a lack of BC First Nation support and given a lack of support from the province affected and given the fact that there's no proponent, I find it puzzling that of all the really great major projects on the table, and I agree with Mark, we got to build more faster. We find it weird that there's been so much focus on this kind of notional pipeline. Meanwhile, the MOU is very specific with timelines, with deliverables on some other things that haven't got a lot of focus. So we were positive actually about an equivalency agreement, laying out an equivalency agreement process that has to culminate by April 1st on industrial carbon pricing. We've been very supportive of industrial carbon pricing. There's a process laid out, very specific process for an agreement on methane. Has to be further discussions on electricity. So interesting that this kind of theoretical pipeline has got a lot of the press attention, but meanwhile, there's a lot more specific items of the MOU that haven't really been scrutinized.
Can I learn from you for a second on the electricity thing? So what I would assume is going on is that they have delayed the transition of the transition in Alberta and presumably in Saskatchewan from coal, off of coal for producing electricity. And part of this MOU is an agreement to get Alberta on nuclear by 2050. So is that what we're talking about here? Is that they're not going to transition off of coal as quickly as they would have had to under the previous regs, Rick? Is that what's going on?
Well, actually, Alberta's off of coal. Great accomplishment.
Okay, sorry. So Saskatchewan's still on coal.
Yep, Saskatchewan, and there's only a few coal plants left in the country. Saskatchewan is on that list, but Alberta actually transitioned off coal ahead of schedule last year.
Okay.
So
they still mine it. That's maybe what's confused me. But anyway,
yeah, that's right. So what's happening on clean electricity is if there's one driver of the electricity discussion of electricity investment globally at the moment, it's low emitting electricity, solar, wind, batteries, nuclear. By a 2-to-1 margin globally over the last couple of years, investment has gone to low emitting electricity sources. And of course, Mark's organization has been right in the middle of some of these very, very big projects now. Most big electricity supply transmission projects across our country now with Indigenous equity stakes. So our concern about what's happening in Alberta is last year, Alberta was the center of a growing, burgeoning, lucrative renewable energy market. The Alberta government actually upended, with no notice, upended that market with a bunch of new regulation. The pipeline of renewable energy projects in Alberta has evaporated by 50% as a result because of that investment uncertainty. And this MOU doesn't do anything to solve that ongoing investment uncertainty. In fact, there's an article in the Calgary Herald this morning about an important transmission corridor at Pincher Creek, Alberta, that is now not going to go forward. And the local reeve actually blames this ongoing kind of regulatory uncertainty in Alberta for that project not proceeding. So, our organization is interested in building out fast, new, effective electricity generation, and renewable energy has to be top of that list.
Heather, you got something to say about this. What is it?
Yeah, I mean, even in the MOU, right in the first paragraph, I think it is, it's talking about AI. And so from my perspective, Rick, everything that's been leading the discussion electricity this year has actually been AI and data centers. And every energy conference has become an AI and data center conference. And you are seeing an expansion of natural gas. You're seeing the increase in the price of natural gas. You're seeing lead times for gas turbines of 5 to 7 years. And when we talk about LNG and pipelines, the money being spent on data centers, it is the biggest capital outlay of the decade. And Canada has missed out on it thus far. And I would put 80% of that on the clean electricity regulations, because we are not building more hydro, very difficult to build more hydro. And solar and wind is not going to satisfy the requirements of data centers for 99.999% reliability. Natural gas is what's driving most of the demand from data centers. Alberta is rich in natural gas. We have a deregulated market. We are cooler. You don't need to cool as much as you do in Texas and elsewhere. We should be one of the top jurisdictions for attracting this money. And the CR tied both of our hands behind our back. So again, already you're seeing, the power companies say, okay, we're going to start investing. This is transformational. This is formidable. And that is the real opportunity. I expect we expect tens of billions in Alberta in the next few years. I expect you'll see some next quarter because of this MOU.
If I can just take a quick kick
Rick,
about
one of the great branding initiatives of all time is natural gas.
I know, it's amazing. I totally agree. Yeah, whoever came up with that deserves a retroactive raise, big time. But I in terms of what Heather just said, it's actually because our organization is really concerned. I mean, we were set up 5 years ago not just to advise on good ideas related to greenhouse gas emission reduction, but also related to improving the success rate of the Canadian economy. We're interested in increased investment in Canada, and it's because of that I'm concerned about this MOU deal with Alberta related to electricity. I mean, if you look at most of the big companies that will be building the AI data centers, Google, Meta, Microsoft, Apple, all these companies have a corporate policy of powering those data centers with non-polluting electricity sources, because two reasons. Number one, they want to be good corporate citizens. Number two, building out wind and solar backed up by batteries is the quickest, the cheapest way of building out a lot of electricity these days. And so if you look at the build out of AI data centers around the world, more often than not all the time, I mean, Heather's right, but more often than not, these things are being powered by low emitting electricity sources. So we're actually worried that if Alberta digs itself into a multi-decade build-out of non-abated natural gas for electricity, it's actually going to be making itself less competitive when it comes to things like AI data centers, not more.
Okay, I'm gonna loop back to that in a little bit, but I want to get back to this issue. I want to take on and get to the bottom of this issue about consultation, Mark. I'm going to start with you on this. I mean, Carney's a smart guy, so he would know that Indigenous opposition kills these kinds of projects. Rumor has it that one of the reasons that Tim Hodgson is in natural resources is because of his success at working with Indigenous rights holders at Hydro One and getting major projects built with the collaboration of Indigenous rights holders, and that he brought that expertise to the piece. All of which makes me skeptical that they've really gone this far without talking to those people at all. Is that what's happened?
Well, you're right. Tim Hodgson was chair at Hydro One, was there at the time that they put a policy in place that 50% equity options could be offered to the Indigenous people who are impacted by lines. And I stress it's options, it's not a grant. The nation still has to come up with the money.
Right.
So that was his role in that. The first line under that policy in Ontario has been built. It's in southwestern Ontario. Came in $15 million under budget, 1 year ahead of schedule. How many capital projects in this country can say that? And a lot of that is because there's no opposition from Indigenous people who are now co-owners of the facility. So you get the question then of, will a party oppose a project in which they have a 50% equity interest? No. Indigenous people, we're economic players like everyone else. Now, the Prime Minister, first thing he did when he came in, or one of the first things he did, was he doubled the loan guarantee, the federal loan guarantee program, which was announced last year at $5 billion. He comes in, he doubles it to 10. So you've got a pair of individuals here who do understand the dynamics of that. What happened, though, around Bill C-5, which was the Building Canada Act, which was initiated without consultation or advisement to First Nations at a time, and then the MOU, is a bit baffling. It begs the question, is somebody else in PCO driving this? PMO? Like what? I don't know. It's very odd. So You're right. It's a bit confusing. That said, the MOU, as Heather's pointed out, does say that Indigenous people will be consulted, and there'll be an equity stake, and there will be economic benefits. But it's a bit mysterious how it's been rolled out.
So here's a perhaps not shocking admission. I've never been lauded as the fastest or most powerful at anything. Rather, I think the adjectives plodding and reasonably sturdy are coded into the Herle DNA. So it's exciting to me when I'm at least adjacent to something that's recognized as fastest and most powerful. On November 17th, our presenting sponsor, TELUS's Sovereign AI factory in Rimouski, was named Canada's fastest and most powerful supercomputer. This, according to Top 500, a prestigious list that ranks the world's 500 most powerful computing systems. TELUS is the only telecom provider in Canada to be included on that list. And here's the truly geek out piece of data that earned TELUS the honor. Top 500 rates a supercomputer's ability to solve complex sets of mathematical equations by measuring how many calculations a system completes every second. Get this, the Sovereign AI factory was able to complete 22.74 quadrillion calculations per second. That is immense processing power to handle the world's most demanding computational tasks. TELUS is using it to accelerate breakthroughs in multiple arenas, including healthcare, medical research, drug discovery, and genomic analysis. Sophisticated climate modeling and analysis that contributes to environmental sustainability, enhanced customer experience and business solutions, and advanced AI modeling for network optimization and service delivery. It's pretty heady stuff, and TELUS is rightly proud of the recognition, Herle Burly-ites, and even more proud that their sovereign AI factory proves that Canadian-owned, Canadian-operated infrastructure delivers world-class computing power while keeping all of the control, innovation, and economic benefits right here at home. I now return to my plodding and reasonably sturdy existence, but I promise you more cool AI stuff next week. So what does a proper consultation look like? And I'll start off by saying that at the age of 63, I'm getting quite cynical. And my experience over the course of my life has been that nobody who disagrees with the decision ever feels they were properly consulted on it.
Well, okay, I'm going to step in here with an Indigenous hat. What happens in my community, for example, we get people in the past, they come to us and said, oh, they wanted to consult and that's all they would need to do. They'd record things, so much so that if the band, Indian band or First Nation, didn't want to speak to the proponent, they wouldn't take the call. The proponent would sometimes call individual members of the band at home and say, hi, can I just talk to you about something? And you have a quick chat. And then it shows up in the consultation record going, oh, I spoke to Mark, member of the band. Click, we've consulted, and off they go. So adequate consultation means something that's respectful, meaningful, and substantive. So Heather, I saw your hand there. So these issues about what does it mean, respectful, substantive, good faith, the question that comes up in courts is it honorable? So that's where it's at. But that's now being superseded by the of UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, saying Indigenous people have their consent must be sought for issues that affect their rights. So you're right. At 63, you're going to have to live to 125 to get this answer down. But we're in flux.
Heather, you have something else?
Yeah, I'll just jump in and broadly agreeing with what Mark said. I'll say, why you needed the MOU. Alberta says we're going to spend $14 million now on advancing this. If there was going to be a tanker ban and the federal government was going to have a veto, don't waste that $14 million. So this MOU at least says, there's a series of things that could happen that would lead us to support this. And so now, take the time and go engage and eventually consult with these nations. So I think it was a prerequisite. Why would you go consult with nations if there was no path to get there? As a year ago, there was no path. But on consultation, an interesting thing about this, and I expect Mark would agree, is that it was Trans Mountain that really, put a lot of the last pieces of the puzzle of duty to consult and accommodate in Canadian jurisprudence, where a lot of, it was, initially in a Supreme Court decisions in 2004, 2005 that said affirmed there was a duty to consult and accommodate. It was very vague and nebulous for a couple of years, and it was really all the jurisprudence that happened under Trans Mountain that really articulated that. And you saw in that case, and you saw again in Coastal GasLink, that unanimous consent is not a requirement. And we've even had this tested on the Prince Rupert gas transmission line, which is part of SOLISIMS, which the NISGA is a proponent of, that not all the communities, and that has been referred to the Major Projects Office already, there isn't unilateral consent from all the communities on that pipeline. But we have had some BC court decisions just in the last few months that said, acknowledging that, we see that there has been a standard that met, they have been consulted, there has been reasonable accommodation, and although we would like to have achieved consent, this project is still approved. And so this isn't, I don't think it's as nebulous as people think. There is a ton of court cases on pipelines. We have a fairly good idea how this moves forward. The social license is probably the bigger issue here of not wanting to go through, judicial reviews and blockades and the polarization that happens in those communities and in Canada when there's a lot of First Nations that are unhappy.
So I want to add to that, the thing about consent. There's this idea that you need unanimous Indigenous consent. It'd be like saying we need unified all provinces in the country to agree on something before we can proceed. I agree completely. The consent is not uniform and it's not 100%. Quebec, Alberta, Ontario, it's like your family. You're never going to get total consent. But there has to be some respect.
Help me understand something. Doesn't the people whose land it has, I presume the AFN doesn't have to approve it, but don't the people whose land it's going through have to consent?
The people who are affected by the projects, because their rights will be infected. However, there are projects happening. Heather's right. There are projects like the pipelines that have already gone through in the West. There's transmission lines. You will have a wholesome discussion among the nations to figure out where they go. And the nations who have an economic interest in these projects will be more open to accepting these projects than nations who just have them put over their lands with no engagement.
Yeah, and David, I just want to add, so the duty to consult and accommodate the legal remedies, you have to be reasonable and accommodate all the concerns and the impacts on Aboriginal and treaty rights. What the UNDRIP actually says, and Mark has already pointed to this, it's not that you have to achieve free, prior, informed consent. You have to act in good faith and seek to obtain it. And that aligns very well with the honor of the Crown, being honorable, as Mark said. So you have to do everything you can. The objective is to achieve consent, to address all the impacts on rights that might happen, but at the end of the day, if you're reasonable and you're accommodating, you're mitigating those impacts, the agency regulator can approve, and judges will uphold it, even if some communities don't consent, even if it is on their land.
I should say that that's a quagmire, though, going down to the point saying, "Oh, we've done the best to get consent," because First Nations may not see it that way. So it's not as simple as straightforward as that.
There you go back to my thing about I don't agree, so I wasn't consulted. So, Rick.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get a handle on this. Are you concerned? I know that you're more concerned about some other things in the MOU, but are you concerned about the pipeline or not concerned about the pipeline? And if you're concerned about it, what would you like to be part of consultations on it?
Yeah. We're puzzled by the pipeline. And frankly, as a result of that, we don't really have our knickers in a knot about it one way or the other. At the beginning, let's go back in this major projects discussion.
Right.
We agree. We're a patriotic Canadian organization. Our country is being pressured by the United States in unprecedented ways. We're interested in the economic success for our country. I have to compliment Heather here. We're buddies in social media, and so she actually tweets a lot about how we need to stand up for ourselves with respect to the United States. I agree. So we thought. The whole point of this major projects push was to, as the Prime Minister said, give ourselves more than the Americans ever could, and to get some big stuff rolling across the country. And he laid out a fairly simple recipe for this. First Nations have to be on board. It's got to be real capital ready to go, ready to be deployed, a real proponent, and the province involved. This would seem like common sense, needs to be enthusiastic about it. And if you take those sort of common sense tick boxes, most of the major projects having been proposed across the country tick all those boxes. I was just in Vancouver this week at a Chamber of Commerce lunch that David Eby was speaking at. A ton of First Nations leaders in the room, because every single major electricity project moving forward, mining project now moving forward in British Columbia, has a First Nations co-owner. Our organization, the chair of our board, Peter Nicholson,
great Canadian.
I agree. Wrote a really smart, very I think hard-hitting piece last year on offshore wind potential in Nova Scotia, and Peter talks a lot about the importance of electrification of the potential of wind across the country. So that the government of Nova Scotia now is moving forward this incredibly ambitious project called Wind West to try to build the first offshore wind turbines in the country, move those electrons westward. I mean, there's all sorts of incredible different major projects happening across the country that are ready to go. We're just puzzled with this theoretical pipeline across northern BC because it just doesn't seem to have much going for it. That's why we're far more focused on other aspects of this MOU.
So Rick is puzzled by the pipeline. How much do all three of you think this pipeline has to do with making Canada's economy stronger and repositioning us against the United States? And how much does it have to do with national unity? And at a time when the Federation is under stress from the United States, making sure that Alberta is feeling comfortable inside the Federation.
That's like asking us if we agree with kittens as a good fluffy thing. Like, come on, like that was leading, like you never had. Yeah. How could you go? Do you believe in Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, and good candy for forever?
No, is it an economic play or is it a national unity play?
I think it's both. I think Alberta was in a situation where there had to be some repair done to the federal-provincial relationship over the past 10 years. That's undisputed. Second, that's undisputed. We're under threat by the United States. We've got to do everything that we've been talking about for a year. Third, is it good for the country and economics? Yes. Like, I started my comments on this, even as an Indigenous person, saying these have to be done. It's a matter of how they get done.
I'll jump. Like, for me, I totally agree with what Mark just said, but it's economic. Like, it is so much money going to be on the table with the 1 million barrel pipeline to Asia. And one reason why, I haven't been as focused on this pipeline is because Trans Mountain has already announced they're probably going to, expand by 300,000 to 400,000 barrels. That's already in the MOU. Right. It hasn't even been online for 2 years, and we're already talking about expanding it, by 60, 80%. It's getting close to expansion. We found great markets in Asia that want that product. The growth is coming from Asia. 70% of oil growth in the next 20 years is going to come from Asia. So instead of sending it further down south to the Gulf of Mexico, where you're competing with the Gulf of Mexico itself, with Guyana, with Brazil, with Venezuela, we can have the Pacific Basin wrapped up for ourselves. And everyone knows the oil sands, fourth largest reserves of oil in the world, as others are depleting. Others are seeing their reserves depleting. Ours are just getting started. It's a phenomenal opportunity economically. And we just done Trans Mountain, which was, went horribly over cost, is 890,000 barrels. We know because of the toll tariff disputes, how much that is worth to the Canadian economy, already providing returns. If you could do a Northern Gateway, I don't even say Northern Gateway anymore because Mark will know that it's toxic to say that, where we need a different word for that pipeline. But a Northwest Pacific pipeline, I mean, there is nothing in this country, not even LNG Canada Phase 1 and Phase 2, that will have the same GDP impact, the same export impact, the same tying of new allies in Asia to us for their energy security. For me, the train has left the building. This pipeline will happen one day because it'll always be sitting in temptation until we do it.
Do you expect there will be a private sector proponent?
Well, and what very interesting language in the MOU was to say that, this will all be, I think, April 1st or July 1st for the pipeline that must include a private proponent. There's no way they would have included that language and Alberta would have agreed to that language if they didn't think that there was a private proponent ready to step up. And which has been overlooked in all this, the technical advisory group, Danielle Smith has Enbridge, South Bow, and Trans Mountain. And she said in a podcast about a week ago, she expects a private proponent or a consortium proponents to come through by that deadline. And I can see how you could get there, how you could de-risk the project. If this is referred to the Major Projects Office, it's a nation-building project designated under C5. It's going to be done in 2 years, and you're going to put in, let's say, mark $10 billion for Indigenous equity. Let's say 33% Indigenous equity. Just guessing, you've dramatically de-risked such a project.
Provided
Mark,
the First Nations are
can we talk
involved.
about this for a sec, Mark? Which is,
Yeah.
can you walk us through how the financing works? So what do you think roughly the Indigenous equity share is going to be of a pipeline, and where will that money come from? Is the federal loan thing, is that enough for something like this?
So first of all, let me explain loan guarantees. Loan guarantees are not cash from the federal government. They're not that at all. The reason First Nations need loan guarantees is First Nations, by virtue of the Indian Act, we don't own property.
Right,
Like
that's
this
true.
shirt, these glasses, we don't own it. It's all held in trust by the Crown for our use.
So
So
you
you have
also
the
can't
situation
borrow
that
anything because you
you
don't have
have no
any equity. You don't
collateral.
have any
You have
collateral.
you have collateral, so you can't
Yeah.
go to normal markets. The way around that has been deemed now loan guarantees, which reduces the cost of borrowing. It's like getting a cosigner on your car, right? It's
Okay.
cosign, government basically cosigns. So there's no cash. One. Second, what's the equity level? First Nations right now are negotiating positions up to 50% across the country, and a lot of infrastructure and electricity lines, that's become the baseline. Other times it depends. It depends. So that's what.
Does that mean they're 50% operationally in charge, Mark?
Well, it depends on the negotiation. In many cases, no, and because you have an operator already, right? So if you're building a pipeline,
Right.
most pipeline companies will never put 100% of their own money into a project. Anyway, they'll go to the debt markets or the investment markets. It'll be a blend of debt and equity in the project. So that 50%, no, it's not. It can be 50% of the equity component, and the rest can be debt. If it's an 80-20 split, that's a lot easier to manage. Still too hard for First Nations. So the question then comes is, how do you service this? How do you manage it? Well, it has to be economic. The money that is accessed once the loan guarantee comes from pension plans, financial institutions, will have to be repaid from the revenue of the pipe. If the revenue is not there, the loan will never happen. The project won't happen.
Right.
It's as simple as that.
Right. Okay.
David, I actually have something positive to say about the MOU. So you let me know when a good time to do that is.
Well, I was going to ask you. I'm sort of at sea. I've considered myself, Rick, over the years a climate believer. I've strained a lot of friendships in Western Canada by arguing with people about climate and climate policy. But I'm a little at sea now because it seems to me obvious that the targets that the world set of 1.5 or 2 degrees of warming are not going to be met, and that emissions targets that were set for 2030 are not going to be met. And I'm wondering what the benchmarks are now. Like, what is the new, what are we working toward now? Now that those things, which seem to me to be cast in stone, like if we don't stop it before 2 degrees, the methane comes out of the permafrost and we're all fucked, right? And now we're blowing past that. And I don't know, what's the next target?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we need to get to net zero emissions by 2050, right? I mean, that is the scientific consensus. That's what every government in this country, every major corporation in this country and around the world is committed to. That's not some government target. That's a chemical necessity of the atmosphere that scientists have advised on. So the thorny debate, as you've just summarized, is how the next 25 years. How do we get from here to there? And you're right that our country, our organization has done a lot of analysis on this. Our country is not going to hit our 2030 target, maybe 2035. But, our perspective is, public policy is full of performance metrics that even if, you lag on, doesn't mean they cease being important. You cease trying. I mean, one classic example would be, emergency room waiting times. These metrics remain important, and then in life, I every New Year's rolls around, and I make another commitment that I'm going to go to the gym more, and every New Year's I fail to do that, and that doesn't mean it ceases being important. So you sort of get up and you try again. So what matters here is the effort and the forward momentum, and we've made big progress in our country in some respects. When it comes to emission reduction, decarbonizing the electricity sector is a big success story. About a 60% decarbonization over the last decade. We want to keep that momentum going because, if there's one attractant of investment globally these days, it's clean electricity. Because companies are looking at it, investors are looking at it. It's a natural Canadian advantage that we should build on. So there's this kind of tendency in the climate change debate to think about everything being a cost or everything being an imposition. And in fact, if you turn it around, you say, well, where's the puck? We want to skate to where the puck's going, and that is a decarbonized future, and these new machines called electric vehicles and heat pumps and clean electricity. I mean, that's what's going to be driving our economy. That's what is increasingly driving the global economy, and we want Canada to be in that mix.
So, but the thing, a lot of it was like I was kind of, because of my lifetime in public opinion research, was always skeptical of public support for a policy that was based on sacrifice.
Yeah, I agree with that.
When Stéphane Guilbeault says that he and Carney just have a different view about how to reduce emissions, is that what he's talking about, or what is he talking about?
I think Stephen, I mean, he can tell you himself, but I think he was quite concerned about these carve-out deals for Alberta on clean electricity and methane. As I mentioned, I was in BC this week, and I can tell you that BC business and governments are quite concerned about the deal on methane that's just been given to Alberta.
Right.
Because again, we were on the verge of kind of solidifying an even-handed, kind of effective national approach to methane regulation. The BC government moved its provincial regulation forward consistent with that. And now all of a sudden they feel like the rug's been pulled out from under them, and they're now regulating methane at a level in BC that's more stringent than Alberta. They're not quite sure what to do at the moment. So that's just one example of the kind of fragmentation that we're concerned about with this agreement across the country.
Yeah. Heather.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. And you're talking about, well, BC would rather not have such stringent, rules. Ontario would rather not have such stringent rules. That's how Alberta has felt looking at the United States here for the last 10 years, is that we've also been on this uneven playing field. All the money, all the investment has been going into shale, and we couldn't compete because we had these additional rules. And I also believe climate change is real, and we should be doing things to mitigate it. And there are some wins in this MOU for this, that we are certainly in an environment certainly with Trump, but even before that, where ESG just became less important, where climate targets just became less important to the public, to financing, to everyone. This MOU maintains some of that. It maintains a toehold. It commits Alberta to saying, you're still going to be working on this. You're still going to be best in class. You're still going to build this pipeline. But if you do, you have to put in a $20 billion carbon capture pipeline. I mean, these are still higher standards than any other oil exporting country is applying to itself. We are applying it here. And the oil and gas sector is on board, and Alberta is on board. For me, there's a lot of wins to be had here. It wasn't, get of our way. We're just going to maximize profits. There is still very expensive commitments to emissions reductions, and you can see that is costing Danielle Smith some capital on the right-hand side of her flank.
So as we all enjoy the lights and the nostalgia and the goodwill, and for some of us even the snow, our sponsor CN would like for just a moment to discuss something a little more prosaic. Grain. A little more than a week ago, CN broke the all-time November record for hauling grain out of Western Canada. It was the third consecutive monthly record. That's sort of a big deal for the Western Canadian economy, and for that matter, the rest of the country too. Now, I know you're all wondering what this all has to do with your ability to luxuriate in the indulgences of the holiday season. And as you might expect, we have the answer ready. The bread, pasta, cakes, cookies, muffins, Yule logs, stuffing, and the whole slew of other delicacies you'll be savoring for the next few weeks rely on grain. Your morning cereal or porridge is based on grain. Most of those hearty winter soups and casseroles need grain as a base or thickener. What do beers and spirits begin with? Grain. The fuel that propels the vehicles you will use to visit family is partially derived from grain. Cooking oils, often grain-based. The cosmetics you might apply on a special holiday occasion will likely contain grain. If you are a vegetarian, your holiday meals will definitely contain significant grains. If you aren't, the roast or the turkey or the goose or the ham on your feasting table would not likely exist were it not for grain-based livestock feed. Canada is sort of a grain champion. And to break grain delivery records, CN invests constantly in new technology, tracks, and rolling stock, working with our farmers, grain elevators, and ports, who often do the same. Like I said, it's a big deal. And now you know. I agree with what you said, but I see a lot of climate people expressing skepticism might be a soft word. On the curse of politics, I would use a stronger word to describe carbon capture and storage. Are you a
Is this
believer?
the broadcast where we're not allowed to use strong words? I
No,
didn't
you can
realize
use
that.
strong words
Oh,
if
he
you
did
want.
already. So
I
he
wanna
used
know
an
that-
F word already.
That's the foul mouth broadcast. This is the polite broadcast. Is that it?
Yeah. But do you know how skeptical I am about heat pumps and solar panels to solve, Canada's issues? Very skeptical. But I mean, we do carbon capture, people doing carbon capture. When you say that, what is going to actually address climate change, not just in Canada, but elsewhere, is technology. Things that are just cheaper or better energy and better uses, that are still affordable, knowing that people are going to maximize the energy use. And this is a project that can actually move the dial on carbon capture as a technology. It can actually, show it, demonstrate it at scale. It's wildly expensive, everybody. And so here's the oil and gas sector, the oil sands companies saying, we think that this is going to be the best way actually to reduce emissions of all the expensive ways. This is the one that we're willing to do, and hopefully bring down costs and bring down supply chain inputs for carbon capture for a lot of other people. And so, I just don't know why we're saying no to particular technologies when we know that this is actually one that, yes, does reduce emissions. We see it already in Alberta. There's a couple of projects, and we see it in Saskatchewan.
But Heather, I agree that technology is a big part of the answer here, and that technology is called solar and wind and batteries, and that's why Alberta should stop trying to crush those industries and sort of do what Texas is doing and welcome industries to compete on their own merit. But
you forgot to mention Alberta's the
Wait,
leader
Heather,
in
let
solar
Rick
and wind investment.
let Rick go for a bit, Heather.
I promised to say one nice thing about this MOU, so I'm going to do that now. There is a commitment to move forward with modernizing, fixing the broken industrial carbon pricing system. This is, if it was working properly,
I read commercials about that.
That's right. Industrial carbon pricing is potentially the most effective, cost-effective way of reducing emissions, but it's not working that well. And one of the weird things going on at the moment, and this is why the go forward on this negotiation between the federal government and Alberta is so important. It doesn't sound like the federal government and Alberta are talking about the same thing. They're already interpreting the wording in this MOU differently. Last week, 7 days after signing this MOU, saying yes, the MOU says the feds and Alberta are going to cooperate on a new, more effective approach to industrial carbon pricing. Alberta proceeded to regulate new damaging changes to the industrial carbon pricing system 7 days after signing the MOU. So there's a lot of shoes to drop with this MOU in terms of these details being worked out. And at the moment, it still looks like the position between the federal and the Alberta governments is widening, not coming together. So this is one area where we were temporarily pleased about the wording in the MOU. And then as the week went on, just really seeing this dispute over what the MOU says is worrisome.
David, I know you want to get to Mark, but I just have, this narrative of these events that Alberta dropped this bomb 7 days after the MOU in bad faith. Those changes to tier have been in progress for months. And as I understand, the federal government was fully aware of these negotiations that were going to be happening to tier on this thing. And the agreement on carbon pricing is not until April 1st, 2026. So there's no way Alberta could undermine an agreement on carbon pricing when that agreement did not exist and they're still negotiating it up to April 1st. So I just dispute this, how this, sequence of events has been portrayed, I will say, in the Toronto Star and in some of the, central media.
Well, it's not just the central media. I mean, why sign an MOU if you then proceed to do exactly the opposite of what you've just said you're going to do?
I mean, it's not the.
How is that good faith?
I expect you know better than me that the headline benchmark price that the federal government sets is different from the credit price in the market, and that the market price has always been lower than the benchmark federal price. And then actually in Quebec, they usually pay 20 to 40% less than what the tier market price has been. But this is the first time we're hearing people upset that we're not paying the benchmark price.
Mark, do you have a dog in this fight?
So you know what? This is great because usually it's me, First Nations against industry and something. I'm watching this with great delight, right? It's off me right now.
There is nothing sexier than an argument about industrial carbon pricing.
No, I'm telling you, it's getting me quite worked up. Mark,
the one thing that caught me, I want to say this as a cause of interest, is that First Nations across the industry have got chips in every one of these sectors: generation, transmission, in distribution, clean energy, geothermal, solar, wind, pipelines, oil production. I'm watching this going, oh, there's opportunity all over here. You guys go for it, start this out. We'll be involved in all of it. Thank you very much. Right?
Yes. And the MOU mentions
I want to go back to the consultations, Mark. I want to go back to the consultations with one last thing, because I got slapped around in a conversation the other day. I got slapped around when I suggested that this was going to be a discussion about money. And I was told that there was going to be a lot more on the table in discussions with the Indigenous rights holders than just money. What else is on the table?
But this is a big thing, especially with this MOU towards a pipe across, or it's not an MOU for a pipe. It's an MOU towards a discussion before it's a meeting and into a pipe. No, it's not just money. And we've seen that already in some of the projects that have gone through in Northern BC. It's about the cultural impact, the environmental impact, the spiritual impact, and respect by the communities who are hosting these facilities.
By environmental impact, you don't mean climate. You mean like land and water.
I'm talking about the rights holders as it's crossing, the territories where the rights are holding. Yes, climate is in that because climate affects all of us. And I think the thing that gets discussed from an Indigenous perspective, or missed rather in this, is that we are Canadians. We are part of the economic fabric. And increasingly we understand that we are a vital part of that. So there has to be discussion about the values that are going to be impacted by Indigenous people. And that is including, as you said, climate, yes, environment, yes, land, and spiritual. The spiritual side gets missed in the Canadian discussion, but to Indigenous people in homelands.
I'm a white boy from Regina. What are you even talking about?
This is origin stories, where we came from. Our names in British Columbia particularly are based on certain areas of the land where certain things happened over time. The stories are given to us. That has to be included in that. Everything from gathering food sources and transportation corridors, but to animals in different ways, fish. All of that has spiritual basis. I, for example, know where my family comes from, and the origin of where we came from on this earth will happen in our territories. We know where those are. And now if somebody coming along going, hey, we're going to put the Trans-Canada Highway 3 right through your spiritual place. No, that won't go. No money in the world will convince the rights holders to do that. So there has to be a discussion.
Does a proponent have optionality? I.e., are there different routes that a pipeline might take to northern British Columbia that could, if one rights holder says no, that you can go another route and find a rights holder that says yes? Is there optionality in here, or do we?
Companies all have options, and that's happened on past pipelines where a company decided, no, we're not going around this valley because it's going to cost us 3% more. Yeah, they have optionality. That's the simple answer. The more complicated answer is there a contiguous block of land that they have to get around? That's a different question.
Right. Okay. I want to wrap up with asking you all, I guess, the question that most Canadians, I think, are trying to grapple with, caring about all the things that the three of you represent. I mean, and Heather, I just consider you representing growth and the economic activity and et cetera. And Rick is here representing climate and the future environment. and Mark is here representing Indigenous peoples and their desire to be part of this on terms that they want to be. These are all things that traditionally most Canadians have cared about and supported. And the country's in, I would argue to you, a unique situation. I think, the more I watch the Trump administration, having read that foreign policy review last week,
Yeah.
they do want to break us so that they can own us. This is a make or break time for Canada, I think. And what I'm interested in is how has that affected all of you in the way you think about these things?
Yeah.
I'm going to go first, so I'm not repeated. I don't repeat after someone else. I said right at the beginning, as Indigenous Canadians, we understand that we need Canada to be Indigenous Canadians. We are very patriotic about what the land is, and we are patriotic about the country we are involved in. We just want to be part of it in a respectful manner that is at equals, and that has not happened in history. We are very concerned about the environment and the climate, and we're very concerned that our children have the economic opportunities that have been denied to our elders. So, affirmative on your question. Do we believe in this country? Yes. Do we understand the threat that's coming? Yes. Do we know that we have a vital part to play in getting to new markets? Yes. It's just got to be done in the right way.
Hey, thanks. Heather, Rick, you got any thoughts about this?
Yeah. I mean, David, I'm one of these Canadians that put a flag up in my house this year. I mean, I'm really concerned for our country, for my kids' future. Donald Trump has terrible ideas. He's got terrible ideas on Ukraine. He's got terrible ideas on tariffs. He's got terrible ideas on climate change. And I think one of the, history will record that perhaps the biggest winner from the Donald Trump era is China in terms of locking up, global control of critical minerals and battery technology and all the things that are increasingly driving global commerce. He has blown up U.S. soft power and economic influence, and our competitors are the great beneficiaries of that. So I think our challenge as Canadians, being showered by crazy Donald Trump news on a second-by-second basis, is to keep our eye on the ball, to make sure that he doesn't drag us into terrible sort of economic cul-de-sacs from which we cannot escape. And so the climate discussion is a big part of that. I mean, he apparently he's got a personal bee in his bonnet about climate change because he owns this golf course in Scotland, and he didn't like the look of the wind turbines that were being built offshore. So this is literally an irrational impulse on his part that's now affecting U.S. policy in every respect. So, the world is decarbonizing. That is the driver of investment globally. We need to deal with these short-term challenges with him while we're building an economy, building a Canadian advantage that'll serve our kids in good stead. And that means finding our own way in the world. And telling Trump to go fuck himself.
I hope to God he's a short-term challenge, but I'm not convinced.
Well, he's not going to be around forever.
Somebody will be.
Well, we have a structural issue in the country, and that's the next podcast. I know, David. I'm back off here.
Heather?
Yeah, I'll just say, if you look at that MOU between Alberta and Canada, that is a made in Canada MOU. You wouldn't see those priorities, those themes, those issues anywhere else in the world. And the question of who you assembled here, that MOU talks about energy, it talks about climate, and it talks about Indigenous issues. That is 90% of what's in that MOU. So I think it is a valiant effort by Ottawa and by Alberta, kind of the competing factions of this country to find a way of how do you do those three things that we all care about in the best way that they complement instead of, kind of fight against each other. But in terms of how I've been thinking about this, like I am I was almost joyful when that MOU came out, that I've seen that this country is a natural resources superpower, energy superpower. We have the resources, not the attitude. And finally, Donald Trump has at least done us the favor of kicking us out of our complacency and enabling things like this to happen. And we have superstars that we've been benching. And now is the time to get them out. We know what our allies in Europe and Asia want more from us. It's energy and minerals. Those are the speeches. When Carney goes to Europe, who does he bring? His energy minister, not his foreign minister, to talk about all the energy and minerals we can get. Canada now has an opportunity to be an actor in the foreign stage in its own right. Not, as I said, as a junior partner of the United States or as a colony, an energy colony of the United States. But now we have an opportunity to think about how do we make these deals in our own right. And our strongest foot, you will not convince me otherwise, is to lead with oil and then natural gas and then minerals and then agriculture. And I'm buoyed that we seem to actually be going in that direction. And I think in 10 years, this country will be better off for it.
Awesome. Listen, I can't thank the three of you enough for sharing your time with me today and with my listeners. This has been such an informative conversation for me, and I presume for many others out there. And you all approached it with a lot of goodwill. So thank you so much for doing it. I would like to right now issue a formal invitation for the three of you to come back next spring or summer after the details have been ironed out on this thing and we know more about what it is and talk about some of more of the reality of as opposed to the speculation today. But this feels to me like an ongoing conversation to have, and I really appreciate you kicking it off today. Thanks very much.
The following is a political advertisement. To build a strong Canadian economy, we need a Made in Canada plan. Public service workers power our economy. They support small businesses and keep our supply chain moving. Canada's economic resilience relies on having strong public services. To strengthen our economy, we need to invest in public services. Learn how at forucanada.ca. This message was paid for by the Public Service Alliance of Canada.
Okay, we're super lucky to have Mike Macdonald, Cheryl Oates, and Andre Pratt with us today. So let's get right into it. And maybe I'll start with you, Mike, as the political veteran of this group. What impact do you think? So this memorandum of understanding, it's broader than just a pipeline, but it's being signaled as a pipeline to northern British Columbia, impact on the tanker ban, a lot of controversy. The Liberals lose their environment minister, not their environment minister over it, but they're a minister with the strongest environmental cred in the government, the activist. They lose him. And there's an awful lot of talk about the implications for BC. But let's take a look at the broad picture. And what impact do you think this MOU has on the electoral context of the country?
Good question. The first thing I would say is it seems like a big opportunity for the NDP to reclaim some of the vote share it lost in the last election. I mean, they fell from 18% to 6%. And I think there's a lot of NDP voters that probably have no business voting for the federal Liberals most of the time. And so some of that, if the NDP are able to re-enliven their base, can come off the Liberal margin. On the other hand, I think what Carney's done is reshape the Liberal coalition and move it to reclaim business Liberals who were already gravitating back to him after sitting out some of the Justin Trudeau elections. But I think there's a lot of support there on that side of the party, and I think there's support among business-minded Conservatives. He got a standing ovation at the Calgary Chamber of Commerce as kind of a proof point of that. So I think we can see a shifting coalition. And if I'm a Liberal strategist, I'm thinking, well, if I give up some on the left, I've got some 2-for-1 votes with the Conservatives that are pretty appealing to me as well. And also, I think it's an agenda that works in some of the major cities' ethnic communities. I think in British Columbia, I think in the South Asian community, the Chinese community, this agenda is likely hitting the spot. So, I think it has the opportunity to be, if not a wash, maybe even a net plus for the Liberals, but it does carry risk in terms of internal division.
Okay. Cheryl, what's your take on this?
So I think there is some initial reads on what this means politically in Alberta and British Columbia. And then I think there's a whole bunch of things that are unanswered that will, become clear as the dynamics around the pipeline MOU play out. The first is obviously in Alberta, Mike mentioned it. The Prime Minister came to the Calgary Chamber of Commerce and he got a standing ovation before he even spoke. And that might not sound like much, but the Calgary Chamber of Commerce is not very, they don't offer applause very easily. Like it's a tough room. And the Prime Minister got a standing ovation twice, once when he spoke and at the end of his speech as well, and he got applause throughout. And in that room, it was interesting to be there because there are a lot of people, a lot of businesses, energy people included, that don't necessarily believe that a pipeline will come of this MOU. And yet there was a lot of hope and a lot of optimism because for people in that room who have long grieved that Ottawa doesn't pay enough attention to Alberta and that all of these laws that have been implemented really hurt Alberta business, it felt in that moment like Ottawa was listening to Alberta. And so that in itself, I think, offered that optimism for the business community and was a win for Danielle Smith. That piece of it, she had 9 bad laws. She got 7 of those laws addressed in this MOU. Like that is a win for Danielle Smith. But then you saw her go to her AGM that weekend and you saw that this actually has the ability to split her base from a group that does not want to see Ottawa collaborate with, or Alberta collaborate with Ottawa and is unhappy about the MOU. And then a group that is like, okay, we finally got what we want. Maybe we can actually stop fighting and move things forward. And that is really dividing the UCP base in Alberta right now. And then in BC, just to add to what Mike said, I think there is, obviously this ongoing dynamic of how coastal communities and nations affected by the pipeline project are reacting. But it's also given the government a little bit of cover to lean into the existing projects more than they had in the past, including a whole bunch of LNG projects and an industry that is growing quite quickly and fiercely in BC right now. It's given the NDP cover to lean into that more than they had in the past as well.
Right. Andre, from the Quebec angle where you're sitting, what does this do to the electoral context in Canada?
Well, as you said, this agreement is much more than just a pipeline. But unfortunately for the government, that's how it's been perceived in Quebec. I mean, people just heard the word pipeline, and it's a dirty word in Quebec, pipeline, since the Energy East debacle. So the moment people heard pipeline, they said, oh, wait a minute, that's not what we voted for, right? We thought that the Liberals, yes, with Carney, would be more friendly to business, but would remain an environmentally strong party. And suddenly the party, so the effect will be a bit similar to what happened when the Trudeau government bought Trans Mountain. And a lot of MPs said, during the campaign that they were knocking on doors and people were just asking, why did you buy a pipeline? So I think the impact, at least in the short term, that's what the impact will be. People just do not understand why the federal government suddenly decides to approve an additional pipeline and a big one. And the intricacies of the agreement have not trickled down yet to people. And of course, the fact that Stephen Guilbeault, who has here a good reputation, has resigned over this, hurts the Liberals even more in Quebec.
So there's I don't know if this is going to come as news to any of the three of you, but I pay a lot of attention to polls, and
Me too.
there's a Leger poll out today
Okay.
on this matter, and it's pretty interesting. It says that the provinces, first of all, it says overall most Canadians support support building a pipeline, an oil pipeline to British Columbia, and opposition to it is around under 20% in the country. Opposition is highest in Quebec at 27, and in British Columbia at 23. Now, let me just stop and ask you, does that surprise you as a low number? Because it does me.
Depends on the question.
Yeah.
Right.
I think other pollsters have had it kind of for BC specifically, but I think even stronger in the rest of the country. I'll leave Quebec aside. Mid 50s support, 53, 55, and opposition, depending on what the question is, can range from 25 to 35. But there is, I don't think that's that much different than
Question is, by the way, just to be fair to
elbows up.
Leger, Mike, the question is, the federal government and the Alberta government have signed an agreement to facilitate a privately financed bitumen pipeline from Alberta to the BC coast, intended to expand Canada's access to energy markets outside North America. Do you personally support or oppose?
Okay.
Mm.
Fair enough. I think what we're seeing here is almost every conservative voter supports this. And then Carney's base, the Liberals moved old in the last election.
Yep.
They got a bigger share of older voters. And older voters, when you look at support, I'm sure in the crosstabs for this Leger survey, it's going to show that older people are more likely to support this than younger people. So Carney is probably bringing along older voters who vote Liberal along with this as well. And so you've got an interesting coalition on this issue between the center right and moderates who may be turned off by culture war, conservative politics, but do support pipeline and these types of projects. And obviously the elbows up stuff is a context that is creating a more permissive environment for this project. People are scared and more concerned about the economy and buy into the need to diversify the economy, and they're willing to set aside some of the concerns they may have indulged in easier times and just say, this is the kind of stuff we got to do now.
Right. Andre, does that number surprise you in Quebec, the 27% oppose? And I would say, by the way, that it's about half that who strongly oppose it, right? So it's about 12% or something like that who strongly oppose the pipeline. So that's kind of the cadre of people you would expect might vote on that basis, people who are strongly opposed.
Yeah, I think
Right?
there's also, I haven't seen the Leger poll, I've seen other polls on the issue, but
Yeah.
I also saw that in Quebec, there's quite a significant number of people who just don't know, have no opinion.
Yeah.
And those people, I think, can, fall on either side depending on the information they get. And one of the issues for the Liberals is that since the agreement was signed, there's been no one from the government campaigning in Quebec about this. And Stephen Guilbeault has been on every TV show imaginable defending his position, being opposed to the pipeline and to the agreement. So, so I think that's an issue. And also, of course, in Quebec politics federally, there's always for the Liberals a problem that when people are not happy, they don't have to vote for Conservative. They can vote for the Bloc, which is a safe vote, a safe protest vote that is always available if you're not happy with the government. And the Bloc, as you saw, is very strongly opposed to this. They even said that they would protect BC's interests, the Bloc Québécois.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but they're doing this because they know that it could be advantageous for them. So I think the government can still make its case, but it needs to be in Quebec. Someone has to speak for the government.
Who would that someone be, Andre?
The only person I can see would be François-Philippe Champagne. He's Minister of Finance. He's well-liked. He's credible. He's a good communicator. But he hasn't been, I haven't heard him at all on this issue yet, at least.
Right. Well, maybe this Leger poll will provide some courage. Who knows? Cheryl, it feels to me like a lot of the support for this among people I talk to, people who, wish they didn't have to support this, but do. A lot of it's based around national unity. And a lot of it's based around the fact that they felt there needed to be some reach out to Alberta, that there needed to be some accommodation of Alberta, especially in the troubled times the country's in. We can't have a weak flank, either in Quebec or in Alberta. We got to be united. So, so people's perception of that hinges upon Danielle Smith now being a continual endorser of this policy and a more welcome member of a more friendly member of Canada than that government has kind of appeared to be over the years. And you talked about the problem she's going to have with her base. And we know from Jason Kenney, that party will throw you out. Like, this isn't just, I've got grumbling at conventions or I get a low vote at a convention. These people will throw you out of office. So she's got to be careful. So how do you see that all unfolding?
Well, I mean, I think there were a lot of people who, I would guess the Premier's office included, who believed that if Danielle Smith could get this deal, if she could get what we're all calling a pipeline MOU, if she could get 7 of 9 bad laws addressed, if she could, she has defined herself as a politician by fighting Ottawa and pushing, pushing, pushing. If she could finally get all of that, that her party would view that as a win. Many people assumed that. And I would say, based on the look on Danielle Smith's face when her party booed her at her AGM, she also expected that. And what we've seen is that the party wants to keep fighting. They do not want to see her make a deal with Mark Carney. They do not want to see her make a deal with Ottawa, and they want to keep fighting. And they still continue to believe that Alberta should be a sovereign province separate from Canada, its own country, if you want to use those words.
Yeah.
And so there is a problem for Danielle Smith in the lead up to her next leadership vote, because as you say, there are some who would say this is a vocal minority of the overall UCP in Alberta, but they are a very, very well organized minority, if they are a minority. And like you said, they have the ability to organize, to take down leaders when they decide that they don't support their values or their objectives anymore. And she is always at risk of that. Like, you've seen her have to pander to the specific requests of that AGM in the lead up to leadership votes, and this will be a problem for her.
The Port of Vancouver is used to shifting conditions, and this moment is a shift like no other. Trade rules are being rewritten. We need to adapt to move more of what Canadians make, grow, harvest, and mine to more customers around the world. And the biggest opportunity for Canadian businesses? Selling more to Indo-Pacific markets, a region that'll make up half the globe's GDP by 2040. That's billions of customers in Japan, South Korea, China, who want what Canadians make to feed families, build cities, and power economies. The good news? The Port of Vancouver is uniquely poised to step up. Why? Diversification and First Nations partnerships have long been its strength, and its growth plans are designed to meet this moment. And with one-of-a-kind projects like Roberts Bank Terminal 2, set to build new industrial land, unlock $100 billion of container trade capacity annually, and create tens of thousands of construction, longshore logistics, and other jobs, it's ready. Because it's not just about moving goods. It's about moving Canada forward, to deliver the true north far and wide. To learn how the Port Authority and its partners are working to deliver for Canada, visit portvancouver.com/delivering for Canada. So that party, though, that party appears to be, again, based on polling on this issue, very out of step with the Alberta sentiment, right? Does that open up an opportunity for the NDP in Alberta?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, yeah.
Because I saw that
NDP,
Nenshi was quick to endorse this, right?
Yeah.
Embrace it.
Well, it's very difficult, no matter your party stripes in Alberta, to be against pipeline development, to be against oil sands development. And you saw Rachel Notley in her term as premier fight for TMX and fight for access to Tidewater, because even if you define yourself as the party of the working people, as the NDP does, all those people that work in the oil sands in Alberta are working people. And so the NDP in Alberta has taken the position that, supports pipelines, supports oil sands, supports the industry. And so, yeah, you saw Nenshi, like Rachel Notley did, step up and say, we support a pipeline. I think we'll probably hear more from the NDP in terms of the nuance around this project and maybe the stages in which the MOU came together in, specifically kind of leaving the First Nations work until the end. But there is an opportunity, I think, for Nenshi to step up and start talking about both the pipeline project, but also Canadian unity as Danielle Smith's party continues to be divided.
Right.
David, I think the fact that Carney has lost a minister and that Danielle Smith is getting got a rough ride at her convention, just goes to show that they're doing something hard. They're both extending to meet to an agreement here. And we'll see how the polling plays out over time, but I think that's what kind of quote unquote middle Canada appreciates, that here you have two kind of warring parties for the last 10 years have with new leadership at the federal level have come and figured something out. And maybe this will all collapse under the details of it in due course. But from a leadership perspective, I think voters will respond and are responding positively to it because it's real. Like it's real because Stephen Guilbeault has resigned. It's real because the separatist element in Alberta has given Daniel Smith a rough time. It's real because BC's mad. The BC government's mad. So I think it's, up until the MOU, the narrative in BC was, well, this is not a real project, and this is an imaginary figment of Daniel Smith's imagination. Well, we're past that milestone now. This is something that has to be reckoned with. Well, I think it is. I mean, the politics.
Well, there's no pipeline project. There's no proponent. There's no route. There's no one coming to the table. So, like at this point, there isn't more of a pipeline than there was before the MOU.
Well, I don't think they expected to get this far, and I think based on what Premier Smith said on my podcast, plug for Hotel Pacifico, is that she expects to bring forward a project in 2026.
Yeah, Cheryl, what are you implying? Because I I've actually been quite influenced by David Cochran, who's been asking guests on his show, like, if Carney doesn't want this pipeline to happen, why is he putting himself through all this grief? I presume Carney thinks a pipeline's going to happen. Why else would you put yourself through this?
Maybe because you want Daniel Smith to play nice for a little bit longer. I mean, a pipeline could happen. I'm not saying a pipeline won't happen. I'm saying today it's hard to see exactly what's going to happen here. There's no private sector proponent. There's no route. The way this was done, First Nations in the coastal region of BC have really dug in on their opposition to the idea of a project that doesn't even exist yet. And what we've learned about pipeline projects from projects like TMX is that when there is such dug in opposition, when you have resolutions passing at the AFN, it makes it really hard to attract a private sector proponent. And then on top of all that, there's still questions around the actual business case for a pipeline if TMX is going to have increased capacity, and we're talking about potential other pipelines like maybe Keystone being reignited. Is the business case there? And so I'm not saying a pipeline won't happen. I'm saying there's a lot of questions about whether a pipeline will happen. And I don't think anyone is like, the standing ovation that you saw for the Prime Minister in Calgary wasn't because all those people in the room believe a pipeline will certainly be built. It's that those 7 hurdles that stood in the way before are not there anymore.
Okay. Andre, why would any voters in Quebec care about this? It's not Energy East. It's not coming through their territory. Why would anybody actually be upset about this one way or another?
Well, I think it's the environment. I mean, Quebecers like to think of themselves as more sensitive to the environmental issues and climate change. And that's why they oppose a pipeline anywhere it would be built, because the pipeline becomes a sign that GHG emissions will increase in Canada because of oil production. And Quebecers are against that, even though they all have automobiles and drive cars and so on. So, I mean, the paradoxes are there. I think what hasn't got through really is the fact that, as Mike said, this is a very, very serious agreement. It's, there's still a lot of work to be done, but this is 2 governments trying to solve a problem. And this is what Canada should be about, right? You have your differences, but at some point you try to reach a compromise, because you can't have the country explode because you can't agree. So this is this kind of agreement that 2 people and 2 governments that have many differences get together and try to solve them. And I think this was hard, but the hard part comes in the next 3-4 months, because there are many details that have not been negotiated. And the agreement says we'll negotiate them until up to April 1st, I think, 2026. And there are a lot of tough issues in there that need to be negotiated. And what has just been discussed about Daniel Smith and her base, and whether Carney thinks he can get political benefit out of this will come into play into what kind of compromises they can agree on in those detailed negotiations that are coming. So this is an important step, but we're far from the final result. And of course, we're even further from a pipeline being built to the BC coast.
How is it going to play out, you folks in this country, with how is the schism between Poilievre and Smith going to play out on this? There is she agreed to too much environmental stuff in this. So Carney's getting slammed by Guilbeault for selling out the environment, but actually got Smith to commit to an industrial carbon price of $130 a ton, and got the pipeline build contingent on carbon capture and storage. So she gave, maybe not enough for some people, but she gave. And the question is, she gave too much for Poilievre. How is that relationship going to play out? How is that schism going to play out? Cheryl, start.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is one of the divides. The other is that we've heard rhetoric from Poilievre saying, like, this pipeline will never be built. Obviously, he's doing that to question the credibility of the prime minister, but at the same time, he's also questioning the credibility of Daniel Smith, which is not helpful in Alberta. I don't know if all of this matters. Like, having been a part of the NDP in Alberta that has disagreed with the federal party again and again when issues related to Alberta we don't agree on, it didn't really have an impact. Like, I think they can defend their own territories and defend their own positions and not run into a lot of trouble. But I guess we'll see. We'll see how it plays out. If it comes to a point where Daniel Smith has to publicly, slap down Poilievre or vice versa, I think it's going to get really awkward.
Cheryl, Alberta is supposed to go to election next year, 2027, is it?
2027.
Right. Do you see that they could go earlier?
I mean, what jurisdiction doesn't have rumors about going
Yeah.
early? But I mean,
Well.
As the internal drama in the UCP continues to build, and as projections for oil price continue to go down, I don't know how the UCP could not consider going early.
Right.
So
just based on your experience, how do you see the Smith Poilievre thing playing out?
Well, I asked that question because I think the window matters and how much runway there is until the next election. And Poilievre is speaking to that base within the UCP that will cause Daniel Smith the most trouble. And when you look at polling, well, you've probably done it. I've done it on national unity issues in Alberta. And let's just say on any given day, 20% say they will separate from Canada. That and 50% vote UCP. That means about 40% of the UCP base are questioning Canada. And
But
so
all of the people in Canada that are questioning being in Canada are conservative voters. So you could just say a big part.
In Alberta, or
yeah, in Alberta. That number is just all conservative voters in Alberta.
Yeah. So I mean, that's a pretty significant. And then, as you know, in a political party, the people that show up to conventions, which they just had, tend to be more to the extremes, right? Or tend to be more motivated on those types of issues, passionate about those issues. So she is walking a high wire act, and she's done that fairly adeptly over the years. And I'll just note that at this convention they had a few weeks ago, correct me if I'm wrong, Cheryl, but they had like 4,000 people at the convention. Yeah. That's astounding. For me, it's astounding. Like, I don't know that conventions.
But can't anybody come? I think 1,000 people come from Bonneville or something.
Well, but still, like 4,000 people to show up anywhere for anything is remarkable in terms of what it says about Alberta's political culture and how enlivened it is. So, yeah, I don't think Poilievre's necessarily the issue for her. I think it's just the nature of her support base.
Right.
I wonder also, David, whether, like Mike mentioned earlier, a large number of Canadians like to see governments working together. And I think Poilievre's stand is more like he's going to fight the federal government, and he's going to fight everyone. That pleases his base, I guess. But I think a large number of Canadians, and even some significant number of conservatives, like to see governments try to solve the issues that concern most Canadians. Yeah. And that's a plus for Carney if he can achieve the agreement in the end, the final agreement.
Andre, you were talking about earlier about Quebecers being more sensitive to climate change and wanting to be more progressive on those issues. generally across the country, climate voters are a fraction of what they once were a decade ago. And a lot of people have blamed that on the fact that people are preoccupied with the cost of living and more immediate concerns in their life, and I'm sure that that is largely responsible for it. But this poll by Leger also finds that almost overwhelmingly Canadians think that this pipeline will help the Canadian economy, including Quebecers. Very few people don't think this pipeline will help the economy. And I'm just wondering how much the context has changed, affecting attitudes about all this. In the sort of the post-Trump, Canada's got to get its act together. We've got to have a stronger economy. We've got to have more diversified trade. All these big things, not the small thing about can I afford food and rent, but the big things about the country are also changing the context for this discussion.
Yeah, I agree, and it has an impact on on Quebec politics also. My point earlier was not that the Liberals will lose 35 seats in Quebec, but the seats that the additional seats that they won at the last election were in most cases seats that they won by a very small margin, and therefore if they lose 2 or 3 percentage points to the Bloc will win those seats again.
Right.
And we know how tight Parliament is right now. So, but I mean, yes, Quebecers are obviously very much aware of the context, and most of the polls show that there are more people who support the pipeline in Quebec than people who oppose it. But as I said, there's a large chunk of people who just don't know because it's complicated and BC is far and they don't really know. So there's an opportunity for the government to convince those people if they actually campaign on the agreement.
I guess I'm going to stick with you, Andre, and then I want to go to everybody on this in terms of the sort of the gestalt impression that people might be getting out there, which is, we tend to look at politics and political implications, and I still do want to hear from you, Mike, about the ridings in BC and how the vulnerable ridings and how they may go, and that kind of piecemeal thing. But I wonder whether, to build on my question to Andre, whether there isn't a bigger narrative emerging about Carney as a guy who's working with premiers to get things done, making progress on international agreement. Like, is there a bigger narrative emerging about the Carney government that is more important than these individual issue considerations? Andre, you go first, and then Mike and Cheryl.
I think to put it bluntly, I think many Quebecers see that, but they wonder how this will affect relations between the Quebec government and the Canadian government. They haven't seen, Carney reaching out to Quebec and trying to solve the problems that imagined or real problems that exist between both governments. So I think there's a sort of and you could see that in some of the columns that were published. Alberta gets everything, Quebec gets nothing. So it's a type of thing that you could read here in Quebec newspapers. So I think people are waiting to see whether some of the issues, immigration being one, whether the federal government and the Quebec government can sit down and reach some kind of agreement on those issues.
Yeah. Mike, you were referencing earlier that there may be a bit of a realignment going on. So expand on that in this context.
Well, there was a bit of a realignment last election, as I said earlier, where the Liberals really appealed to older voters. And in a way, we see that provincially here too, where the BC NDP are appealing more to older voters now, and the BC Conservatives parallel to federal Conservatives in terms of attracting younger voters who are stressed out about affordability and housing. And so going forward, I think by having if they're communicating a lot about the economy and building projects, I think the federal Liberals have a chance to reclaim some of those 35 to 54-year-old voters who worried about paying their mortgage, South Asian, Chinese voter blocks that this type of narrative appeals to. And I also think Carney's leadership style, I think he's projecting like, we have this threat from the U.S. and I've got a plan to deal with it. And, and I think that has appeal. What I don't see out of the Carney government that may impact them is that they've got the big ideas and the big macro narrative, as I just outlined, but it's the political execution is not necessarily there. And so when they came up with the MOU, they smartly went to the Calgary Chamber of Commerce for lunch. But there was nothing for BC in terms of like how they were covering that off. The premier said, no one's met with me. I've been left out. The federal Liberal MPs are in a witness protection program in British Columbia. So that's, that wasn't, in usually you think about here's a rollout and here's everything you do. And maybe it's a virtue of this government that they just go and do stuff and worry about the politics later, but it's going to catch up to them at some point.
You would think.
You would think, yeah.
You would think. Cheryl, do you see this as an opportunity for the NDP to gain back some voters who probably thought Carney was a more progressive person on climate than he looks like he is at this exact moment? Or do you see Carney as building a leadership profile that's going to keep those NDP voters with him as a bulwark against Poilievre?
Well, I mean, federally, when we're talking about the federal NDP, there's so many questions about the direction that the party will go in pending the outcome of the leadership election. So that part, in terms of like what opportunities exist, I think it really depends who's leading the party and what
that's fair.
values
that is fair enough.
they
I
want
can
to
see
lean
this playing
into.
out very differently between McPherson and Lewis, right?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm thinking. But when it comes to like the dynamics in the West, I would say that Mark Carney, I think, earned some points in Alberta, like I said, by showing up and demonstrating, at least to the business community, that he's listening. And for all the Albertans who have defined themselves by feeling like Ottawa doesn't listen to the province that contributes so greatly to Canada's GDP, that was a big moment for Alberta. But it's so precedent setting. And I think that, like Mike said, there's a lot of political fallout to come for two examples. One, Alberta has agreed to $130 a ton industrial carbon price, well below the federal backstop. What does that mean for every other jurisdiction in terms of meeting that equivalency? And then as another example, BC has 4 projects on the major projects list. None of them have been designated as in the national interest. BC's been doing all the work to get First Nations on board with all of those projects, with real proponents, with real routes, with real plans to build, without the kind of federal support that at this point, fictional project has in Alberta. And that creates, a lot of unhappiness in BC toward the federal government when they think they've done a lot more to deserve it.
Well, let me just stick with you, and then I'm sure Mike will have an opinion about this, if not Andre as well. But so the BC government Premier Eby had a very clear strategy, and I was part of it because I interviewed him for the Canadian Club and the Herle Burly, and he wanted everybody to understand. This is a couple of months ago, before this MOU happened. He wanted everybody to understand that he had done exactly what you said, that he had built social license for a whole bunch of projects, got Indigenous support for them, got public support for them. They were ready to go. LNG, this, and that was all huge upside, all of which would be wiped away if there were to be a proposed pipeline that would blow up that consensus that he'd built. It was a very strong message, and when I interviewed him, he was hard on message track. And then, as you said, and Mike said, he hadn't been consulted on this pipeline. He seemed a little grumpy, but he didn't seem terribly grumpy. And he pivoted pretty quickly toward conditionality. In other words, toward bargaining as opposed to resisting. So I'm actually skeptical that he was as out of the loop as he said. And I'm wondering whether this wasn't all some organized. I mean, given what Mike said earlier, it seems unlikely that this government organized anything this politically complex. But are these people all role-playing to a little bit of a degree?
Well, I think when you have projects that cross multiple jurisdictions and every player in the process has a different audience that they're speaking to, all of it has a little bit of political theater to it. Like everyone's going to take the opportunities they can to stand up as the hero for their specific jurisdiction on any given day, whether that is grounded in fact or reality or real proposals or not. And so I think for David Eby, it is true. Like there are nations saying that our, lifting of the tanker ban and a bitumen pipeline is a red line for us. And so, although we haven't stood in the way of LNG development, it's all on the table if you decide to cross these red lines for us. And so, I think when he says real projects are in jeopardy if we move forward with this project, I think that is a real thing. At the same time, it is also politically helpful for him because it has coalesced support behind LNG and behind the NDP's support for LNG that didn't necessarily exist before. So it's true and it's also politically beneficial. So I guess two things can be true at the same time.
It's also reckless,
Go on.
well, I think they're counting on these projects, these LNG projects and the mining projects, and why undermine them? I think the legitimate issue for the government is the federal government going to lose its focus on where they need their help to get LNG and mining projects, that are in the fast track process through the Major Projects Office. And the federal government should say, hey, look, we're laser focused on that. We can do two things at once. We can chew gum and walk down the street at the same time. But when you say that we're jeopardizing a consensus on the coast, I think that's playing with fire. And frankly, like I'll take one project example, the Nisga'a LNG project. You have the Nisga'a Nation that's the proponent of the project. They're not walking away from that, So I just don't really know what he means when he says that.
It doesn't have to be proponents, right? Like we know from previous projects that when nations decide that they want to not stand with social license, it can make a project so risky that it doesn't make sense for a proponent to proceed. And I think that's the risk that's on the table when nations say we're going to pull our support, we're not going to stand with LNG anymore. That's the risk for all of those projects that are in the works that now they're going to face opposition that they hadn't previously faced.
Well,
it makes you wonder, what work the government did before signing this agreement with the different Indigenous communities and whether there has been any work at all. Because, they're central to all that we're discussing, whatever the Canadian politics to this. Indigenous nations have to agree, around this pipeline. If they don't, then the pipeline becomes impossible, I think. Was there any work done? Is there any work done with them?
How does it come down to anything more than really money? Just be blunt. If I didn't think a pipeline was going to create jobs, make Canada wealthier, make Canada stronger, I wouldn't support one either. Like just to have a pipeline, why would you want to do that? Right? So the pipeline has support because we think it's going to do a lot of wonderful things for our country and our community. They need to believe the same thing, right?
Well, yeah, but I'm picking up on your comment, David, about money. I think it's a lot more than that. When Christy Clark was negotiating on oil pipelines back in 2011, 2012, it was marine spill regime, it was land spill regime, it was proper environmental process, as well as economic benefits for the province, the money. But, I think I'm going to try to nuance my position here a bit. I'm critical of the Premier for being reckless. On the other hand, I am concerned that Alberta is reckless in that they don't know what they don't know when they come to the coast and have these discussions and are naive about what is a very complex ecosystem of First Nations. And they do have legitimate concerns and they do have to be dealt with. And some will likely never agree with this. It doesn't mean the project can't happen, but it takes consultation. It takes good faith. And I think both the federal government and Alberta are way over their skis right now on that aspect of it.
Yeah.
And BC has a legitimate concern on that. And I just don't know that they should voice it, in the way that they're voicing it.
And
so give me some thoughts on the political management of the Indigenous file overall. And I on these major projects. Because I'm going to say another kind of dumb thing, which is that Carney talked, and I think, got a lot of public approval in the election campaign about how we were going to build things that we'd never built before and do it faster than we'd ever done it before. And that reflected the sense of urgency that people have about the crisis that Trump has imposed on Canada, etc. Right? My conversations with Indigenous leaders tells me that they're not adhering to that timeline. That they're not saying no to things, but they're not feeling that sense of urgency to get it done next month. And it feels to me like if unresolved, that could be a really negative division point in the country. So what are your thoughts on how broadly to manage gaining Indigenous support for the kind of projects that I think most people think we need to build in the country? Cheryl, you want to go first?
Yeah, I think in terms of Alberta's proposal, that it was done backwards. So Danielle Smith said she wants to build a pipeline. She says she wants to build it to the coast. She says there's a business case. She says this is how it'll help GDP. This is how it'll help our economic and energy security. And then she gets the federal government to support it, but she now is talking to the affected communities last. And so, like we said earlier, that has sort of like pushed those communities to dig in their opposition much earlier than they would have had they been talked to at the beginning. And then I look to Manitoba, who announced this week that they are going to do major projects differently, including when they think about their port and the port expansion. And they're going to build a 50-50 Crown Indigenous corporation that will oversee major projects, so that instead of putting those discussions at the end, they're going to put them at the beginning to say, let's have this group, this 50-50 group, consider major projects, so that even because the way that it's set up in the BC discussion, we're clearing regulatory hurdles, we're getting rid of laws, we're going to fast track everything in 2 years. None of that matters if at the end of it, Indigenous communities cannot get on board. And so Manitoba is basically saying, we've watched all of this happen. We're going to do it differently. We're going to do Indigenous first. And I think just from the outside, that looks like it has a lot more opportunity for success.
Interesting. Okay. Andre, what do you think?
I agree. And I mean, you have to remember and I'm not an expert, far from it, on BC politics, but I was in the Senate when we voted on the tanker ban, and there were, the affected Indigenous communities really wanted this tanker ban, and not for economic reasons, for environmental and other spiritual reasons and so on. And they really wanted that tanker ban. I was opposed to the tanker ban and still am, but I mean, and for other reasons, but they really wanted it. So it's not only a matter of money, David, it's really an issue that relates to what they perceive as their territory, and that they want to be in control of what goes on there. The agreement, the MOU, does mention the idea of a co-ownership, but it's not a condition. It's something that is, wished.
There's a general saying in life, Andre, that there's always a price. Is that a crass thing to say?
Well, no, I don't think it's always true. I'm sorry to disagree, but I don't think it's always true, and especially not in this case.
Okay.
Yes, but communities on BC's northern coast need to see what's in it for them, whether in economic terms or otherwise. And obviously that background work hasn't been done, or at least we haven't heard about it.
Right. Mike?
Well, just building off that point from Andre, I think in the LNG experience, yes, there are economic agreements, but it was impactful for First Nations to go and tour LNG facilities around the world and see how it works, to see how it's safe, and to see it with their own eyes, and feel assured that they weren't despoiling their territories and creating a burden for future generations. So, I don't underestimate all that stuff. And as far as the tanker ban goes, yeah, absolutely. The Haida and other First Nations along the coast are pretty strong on that. But we're shipping oil on the South Coast, and First Nations down here don't get a tanker ban. To Premier, it should be noted that Premier Eby is actually advocating for TMX to be expanded as an alternative to a northern pipeline, and is okay with more tanker traffic through the first and second narrows of Burrard Inlet and out through the Gulf Islands. He's prepared to take that risk. And that will be part of the discussion going forward, is not necessarily whether or not there should be more oil exports through British Columbia, but how and how much. go through. And right now, it seems like the TMX expansion in Burnaby is pretty much, clear sailing and green lights from the NDP.
Can I just add one point, David, just to the question of like, doesn't everything have a price?
Yeah.
I think in this specific case, consultation is such a big piece of it. And the reason that you saw a unanimous resolutions pass at the Assembly of First Nations is not necessarily like, I'm sure there are nations there that their first priority is the environmental impact or their first priority is a benefits agreement. But as a whole, that group, I think part of what their protest was the precedent around consultation that this would be setting to say we're going to build a project, we're going to fast track a project, and we're going to talk to affected nations last. And that's why you saw that resolution pass with so much support at that assembly.
Okay, cool. Thank you. One last question before I let us, no, I got two questions. This is the second last one before I let us all go. Andre, we're heading toward a provincial election in Quebec. The Parti Québécois are going to win again by the looks of it. Nothing certain after the year we've gone through in politics. Have to say that nothing is certain in the future, but it looks like the PQ are going to win that election, and they are committed to having a referendum on separation. And even though the polls show very little support for separation, they have made it part of the raison d'etre of the party again. So for internal party reasons, they're committed to holding a referendum, not because they think it's a particularly opportune time. Now, Guilbeault went out and said that this MOU will add fuel to the flames of separatism in Quebec. So I guess A, I would ask you whether you think that's true, and B, whether you think this issue will play into the provincial election at all.
Well, part of the separatist narrative is that Canada and Quebec have become so different on so many different topics that separation should just happen because in fact we're already separate. And one part of that argument is, look, they're building a pipeline and we're against oil and gas. We want to get away from this. We're building hydro dams and so on, and they're building a pipeline. So that's one reason we're so different. And frankly, my concern is that whatever polls say today, we all know from 95 and we know also from Brexit that once a campaign starts, you never know how it's going to end up.
Right.
So, but I don't think the environment would be a major issue or the MOU with Alberta would be a major issue. But certainly the idea that Canada is different than Quebec and that our economies are so different and we're so different on the environmental front and so on, that separation is actually we're already separate. Why not just confirm it through a vote?
Maybe we don't have as much to fight about anymore because of that too, though. So my last question to you all is, first of all, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been amazing. If you were advising the federal government right now, how would you tell them to message this MOU? What should they be communicating about this to people? Cheryl?
If I was the federal government, I would be leaning into all of the pieces of the MOU that don't have to do with the pipeline. Because that's where they've made progress. Like they've actually got Alberta to come to the table with agreements on climate change, with ways forward on laws that have been really contentious. And it is a demonstration, especially with a province that loves to fight Ottawa, that the federal government can and is willing to collaborate and work together. So if I was the federal government, I would lean into that part, leave the pipeline for Alberta to figure out the next pieces of.
Yeah. Mike?
I think I lean into that. This project will make Canada stronger. It will make us more resilient against the United States trade action. And that if it does proceed, it will be done with the highest environmental safeguards, both on the marine side and the land side, with extensive consultation with First Nations. Like we'll do it right. And I agree with Cheryl too. Like there's other pieces of the puzzle on this MOU that there's a lot of interesting things to talk about in terms of intertie. I mean, this is more for the policy wonks, but the intertie between the provinces to facilitate a better electricity market. If they can make a case that it'll be good for electricity rates, even better. But getting down the details on that. But I think the way up here is look, we've got an existential threat. Canada's got to do a better job of having hard power in the world, and this is one way to do it.
Andre, how would you message this?
But the thing is, it's not so much the message. I think they probably know what the message should be, but they're not communicating at all. At least in Quebec, they're not saying anything about the agreement. So, I mean, you know, as the Montreal Canadiens are finding out these days, if you leave the ice to the opponent team, they will win. And this is exactly what's happening now.
Imagine how the Canucks feel.
You need a goalie, Andre. You need Canucks. You need a goalie.
We do, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Listen, thank you all so much. Great conversation. And Andre and Mike, it was great to have you back. And Cheryl, it's so lovely to meet you. And thank you for giving the time. And thank you, all you Herle Burly-ites, took the time to watch and listen to this show, and to the sponsors who made it possible. See you next week.